A minimum of 70% brick coverage of each wall area, which shall be accented by stone, is required on all sides of commercial and institutional buildings, whether visible from a public street or not. Where split-face concrete block is to be used, it is recommended that such be used in combination with brick or stone, and that split-face concrete block not exceed 20% of the area of each wall. Where EIFS, exterior insulation finish systems, or synthetic stucco is to be used, it is required that such be at least 5 feet above grade and above brick or stone, and that brick or stone be used as accents. Full chroma color shall not be used except as accents. Neon lighting tubing is to be limited to the walls of commercial buildings in the form of a single band of each tubing around not more than the perimeter of the building. For a more detailed outline, refer to Article 2, Section 2-108, signage of this manual.
Could you also read number 4?
Okay, number 4, prohibited building materials. The use of certain materials is prohibited in all commercial zones and for institutional buildings in all zones. These prohibited materials include vinyl siding, exposed or painted corrugated metal or plain sheet metal roofs, except that standing seam metal roofs and batten metal roofs are allowed. Exposed or painted metal siding, exposed standard concrete blocks, and exposed concrete tilt-up walls. That's all. Did I read that wrong?
Is that, I don't know. Oh, relationship to streets, never mind. That goes with that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess this meeting was called directly with the Hardys that came in with no brick or did not meet the brick requirement. Do we know what their stone percentages were that they used?
Mr. Beata, I don't recall offhand. I know the initial plan, I want to say, was somewhere in the 20 to 30% range on
Per like each wall?
per wall, I believe.
They ended up with about 58% total.
I think that's correct. I think probably the percentages that the percentage number is the easiest one to kind of shoot holes with or have issues with. But maybe even more so than that is that we've really limited to one material, and that's brick. I mean, there is no, it doesn't say stone, it doesn't say synthetic looking brick or stone or anything else. So I know historically the example that has been used with staff, I think over, not necessarily specifically with this planning commission, but a few planning commissions is, well, what if a Cracker Barrel wanted to come in?
They have no brick.
They have no brick.
No stone.
Or no stone. So, and while that's not to say you can't offer variances and give some relief, but, you know, I think the Hardys lended itself to having this discussion on if that's still the vision, if that's still, you know, what you intend to require, and or if you want to revisit that and see kind of where things need to be in relation to that. So the other item that was directly associated with Hardys was there in paragraph 1, midway through the paragraph, it talks about EIFS, or exterior insulation finish systems, or stucco. and that it's required that any of that material that's proposed for a wall must be at least 5 feet up the wall before it begins. Anything lower than that must be brick or stone. So there was, the applicant expressed some concern that would severely alter their prototypical building.
They had glass below that, didn't
Right. They felt like there would be some hindrances with some of their windows, and so, you know, that's something to consider as well. The other thing I find interesting, and Mr. Larry may be able to expound on some of this, but you've got 3 different legal terms in that one paragraph. The 70% brick, the legal term that's used is shall. The 20% of the split face concrete block, the legal term that's used is recommended. And then the EIFS material, I guess, linchpin term that's used is required. So I know each of those legally has different ramifications when it comes to regulations. And, you know, I don't want to get into splitting hairs tonight, but, you know, we need to keep those things in mind when we have reviews of specific projects to say, okay, what is the actual word that's used in this paragraph? Is it shall? Is it recommended or suggested? Because that language is interspersed all throughout the design review manual. I would suggest to you that anything that doesn't say shall or is required, really, you don't have a whole lot of teeth in mandating that that's what it be. So, but Mr. Larry may want to expound on that.
Just to get you thinking in the right direction, there's some other words that are synonymous with that also. If you say shall and recommended, gives you a little bit of wiggle room. Shall is more strong than recommended because shall is a strong recommendation. A recommendation is just a recommendation. But if you say if it's required or it will be, you don't have a whole lot of room short of just giving me a variance around it, because there's no wiggle room in will or that it is required. And the others, I would suggest, and you can't do this on an individual basis, looking at them individually, because if you do that, you're setting yourself up for a real headache with arbitrary and capricious. Because then where do you draw the line? You might want to add some stuff, and I'm just thinking out loud. It's your call, but you might want to add some language to the effect that the brick percentage that you can include outbuildings. Because, you know, if I've got an outbuilding that has concrete walls that are exposed, they'll be covered with something. And if I cover them with brick and add that to my total, that might be one of the things you'd want to consider, because certainly an outbuilding, storage building, whatever they may have, that's covered with brick. And you might want to look at as Mr. Will said, some of the stuff with artificial brick, synthetic brick, because some of those things look good. But the way it's written now, brick is brick is brick, and if it's not a brick, regardless of how well it looks, you couldn't use synthetic marble in the instances where it doesn't have anything but brick. If you got the stone, you might even want to have some things about making some allowances for windows if some other surface is covered, i.e. an outbuilding, a storage building or something, because you have some buildings that have the windows designed such that if you cut them off to 5 feet above the ground, you've drastically changed the look of the building. It might be an improvement, it might not be, but if I've got thermopane that I buy for everything that I do, and it's certain such and such size, if I got to cut 4 feet off of it, I've got to order some more glass for the area that I'm only going to be allowed to have, that I've got to cut off 5 feet of.
It, sounds like this section could be, 20 pages long.
Well, I mean, why can't it just be as simple as what we don't want to see as a building
Yeah.
material, and then we can make the decision on the building materials and percentages of what we will allow on a case-by-case basis. Can we
Well,
not do that?
You can, but you're courting arbitrary and capricious. Because what you're telling me is I'll let you use this material, or this material. And it's fine to list that because I can still look at it and say, okay, I want to use this one. But when you start doing the thing of saying you do it on a case-by-case basis, you get back into ultimately designing the building at a planning commission meeting. And it's a short walk from, okay, we'll let this guy do this, but we won't let this guy do this. And you look back and say, well, you let this guy do it, you let this guy do it, and you let this guy do it. You just created a basis for an arbitrary and
Well,
capricious
what
decision.
in the case of a Cracker Barrel? It's all wood, so
Well, what you
you
did
just
then-
give a variance on
Yeah,
all of the
absolutely.
building material.
Absolutely. If that's what you wanted to do, you give a variance on the building material, period. Because you would, I assume, make the decision that Cracker Barrel is not going to change the way they design their buildings, and that the benefit to the community outweighed making them build it out of brick. And then the next guy that came in with that could say, okay, you let Cracker Barrel use wood, I want to use wood, but I don't want to use that color wood, I want to use some other color wood. And that's a risk you run, but on that kind of a basis, I think you could probably, if they did a proper appeal and said, okay, this is the design review manual. It's not the absolute end-all be-all. What you don't want to do is let me just make up my mind. If you've got 10 different materials you let me use, then what you are in essence controlling what the building will be made from in some manner. If I just go out there and decide, I'm gonna build this out of split rails, well, that's not on the list.
We had a pretty good run of businesses adhering to this with national chains, O'Reilly's, AutoZone. I don't think the Hardee's building looks bad, but, it's kind of looks like one of those where they threaten to walk, and then it's, rewrite our codes. But like you guys been saying, it seems like where do we begin if with all these different options, and, it's almost like this is what we would like to see and then go from there with it, but I'm just trying to get my head around where we start.
Well, and the glass issue is, dealing with architecture all my life, it's like the glass issue is a big deal. Because, some of this limits how the glass is, able to be used, and I don't think that's a good plan either.
Yeah, I think anytime you have a fast or any kind of food establishment, their windows are gonna be similar to Hardee's. They're gonna be low, so when there's a table there, people can
That's right.
look out, and if it's 5-foot stone on the outside, you can't, if you're sitting down, you can't see out of it, so.
Well, I guess some clarification there. The 5-foot requirement just is saying that if you use ephes or stucco material, that material can't start lower than 5 feet on the building. It's not saying that it has to be 5 feet all the way around the building. It just says if you use stucco or ephes, that it can't start any lower than
But
that.
if I understand correctly, if they're gonna use it, then you've gotta have that band underneath it, right? Of the
Correct.
brick or stone.
Correct.
Well, then, if they're gonna put the glass in that, then that would affect what they're asking for there, right?
Well, the brick or stone would still be from grade to 5 feet. And if a window was cut in, so be it. I mean, we're not requiring them to, like I said, brick or stone, everything up to 5 feet. They just can't, basically it's saying they can't have ephes material lower than 5 feet closer to the adjacent grade. they can have windows all the way to the floor if they want to. But if right next to the window, they chose to put stucco or ephes, it has to be at least 5 foot above the adjacent grade. So, I mean, and to Mr. Beata's thought, there are a handful of businesses that have met that and have the windows that go down. I think Taco Bell being one of them, I believe.
I think they came back and put more brick up on the
Yeah.
backside. The
Yeah.
thing I don't want to happen is if we start allowing more, then you have a business come in here, they've got 3 different plans that they're going to bring in front of us, and if we let them do, because ephes is the cheapest material,
Sure.
stone is probably the most expensive.
Right.
That's why brick's kind of a good standard, but, you know, if everybody's going to come in and, hey, they're going to let us do our cheapest design, here you go. So,
I think that's a valid point. I mean, there's one of those sections, and I handed out my last copy, but one of those sections addresses prototypical designs. It's on the second sheet, I think, that you gave. So you have a provision in there that says for, again, I'm just paraphrasing, for national chains, I believe, or something that says, you know, they would be required to,
2-104.2.
yes, national, quote, standard design should be adapted to reflect the city of Fairview context by careful siting, use of compatible materials, and landscaping of the site so that it blends with its surroundings. I'm not here to speak on prior projects, and I don't want to address them specifically, but national retailers or restaurants or chains are very familiar with going to a local community and having to abide by their local standards. So the idea of your standards, quote, scaring a potential business away, I don't want to say that's completely invalid because, yes, at some point they say, sorry, but that's too much. But these businesses, as a general rule, are very familiar with and understand that each jurisdiction is going to have some nuances that others don't. And, you know, at some point, you have to decide to say, okay, this does not meet our intent, and therefore you need to change it. If you feel like it does, then so that's fine. And again, this will be the 3rd time I've stated it publicly. I've stated it privately as well. I think the Hardee's building looked good, but it didn't comply with what your standards were. So if you want to dissect that and say, okay, if we are comfortable with how the Hardee's building looked, let's maybe use that as a base and say, what percentage did they have? Would we be comfortable for future buildings at that percentage? And kind of work, I mean, that's the only way I know how to kind of work through it.
Well, I don't know why we're in, and this is no reflect, you're just doing what we've asked you to do, but I don't know why we're trying to fix something that's not broke. To me, I mean, we can give variances if we choose, if we decide, but, you know, I really feel like that it would be better to have a higher standard, and then we could always have something to work back from. The ideal of this running businesses off, I don't think so. I mean, Hardee's came back. We came up with a good compromise. Same thing with Taco Bell. As Will stated, it's the industry standard. I mean, they're used to coming to communities and having to comply to their building codes. So I don't know. I just, you know, Cracker Barrel wants to come to us, then we'll talk about the way they're, you know, obviously as a board, we can give fluctuation if we choose, but I just don't know why we throw out a standard out the window.
And maybe it's not so much throwing it out, and to your points earlier, Larry, if it's a little more flexible in that you include the outbuildings and the garbage surrounds
Yeah.
buildings and let those be a part of the percentage, which Hardee's did. You know, they went from 30% to, I don't know what it ended up, but it was 60%, 55, 60%. So, again, to your point about them knowing the nuances of each jurisdiction and complying with those. So maybe it's just, instead of revamping the whole thing, we add some caveats such as, instead of just brick, it's synthetic brick, stone, marble, et cetera, and give more flexibility in there. Keep the percentage perhaps, and like you said, then we could always negotiate down from that, but create a little bit more flexibility in it to get away from rigid brick. That's it, it's just brick, there's nothing but brick. So maybe that's the approach we ought to take for this, or start thinking about perhaps.
My concern was the time it took to get from what they proposed to what we accepted. I don't think we should have to go through so much time getting from one, from one thing to the other. Because it was months of we only meet once a month. So it was months of meetings to get to this final, what we accepted. Because we turned it down when it was just, I wasn't here, but it was, turned down because boom, it didn't meet 70%, so boom, turned down.
No.
Well, no, but they were told, they were told to come back.
Yeah, we
Well, yeah,
said,
they were told to come back, but that's what I'm saying. You're talking about months of, since we only meet once a month, months of discussing how this is gonna finally end up.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody, any corporate business expects to come in and have it all done in a month, or they would do exactly what we're asking.
Well, and I'm not saying 1 month, I'm just saying it just appeared that it took, they were ready to build and we're still talking about.
Well, and I think some of that can be deterred too by staff. In the staff meetings, you could say, and give us the information ahead of time before we're ready for a decision of this is what we'll compromise on. I don't think we necessarily caused all the delay. They only came in front of the planning commission twice. So, and that would have been 1 month's time, so I really don't see that, that we delayed them.
the thing to think about too is yes, we throw a wrench in their timeline, but that building's gonna be there for how many years, so.
Well, and I'm not so much saying, Hardee's, I'm just saying for future, if we could, maybe streamline it a little more so that they, so we can decide on these materials that,
I'll remind you that the first time they came with a site plan to the planning commission, it was approved contingent on those changes. They chose to come back and continue to pursue a less than 70% standard. So they, after their first planning commission submittal and approval that had contingencies, they could have chosen to revise their plans according to those contingencies, submit back to the city, and then be ready to move forward without ever having to come back to the planning commission. On their own accord, they chose to continue to pursue the less than 70% standard. So it wasn't that you rejected it or denied it. They just wanted to continue that pursuit of a variance. So
The first delay they had was out of our control. It is something that y'all found, and that delay was whether or not we allowed fast food in our city center overlay. So that really was something unseen.
Yeah.
But that you couldn't give a
and-
variance to.
Right.
And from my conversations with their legal counsel, if you had what you had in the last meeting that everybody agreed to at that first meeting, they couldn't have approved that anyway. They would have had to come back to their people and come back because they wouldn't have had that authority. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Gotten from talking with them, they never actually said that, but I don't think that they could have agreed to it that night.
Yeah, I thought we showed a lot of, meeting them halfway by, rewriting our ordinance to let them do what they wanted to do. But But I kind of agree with
And like
what.
I'm saying though, I'm not talking
No,
about
no.
Hardee's, I'm talking
I
about.
know, I'm just
yeah.
saying in general though,
Yeah,
because we're
general.
getting it, but
Yeah.
the one thing I like that Mayor Carroll said was the, you know, if people bring us what we want, then I'm all for fast tracking them and getting them through and, you know, so.
And two, I'll remind you, in the not too distant past, the procedural aspect of site plans involved 1 month was a conceptual plan, the next month was a preliminary plan, and the third month was a final plan. So you inherently had at least 3 months before they could ever get final site plan approval. That's been condensed down to 1. There is no conceptual or preliminary now. They just come with a final. So if you desire to move back to a preliminary conceptual, which is certainly your, within the realm of possibility, then during that preliminary discussions, that's when you could have discussions with the applicant to say, hey, you're not at 70%, this is what we require, how do you want to remedy that? And then, so therefore, all that can be done and discussed and finalized, in theory, before you ever see a final site plan. So something to consider, but again, you'd be adding another month of the process if you mandated preliminary.
Well, and I agree that maybe, we can look at other material, that it doesn't have to be, all brick. I think coming up with a list of, might help, especially with some of these corporate, businesses.
And you, in paragraph 6 there's permissible building materials, and it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it lists 8 additional materials, of which 3, it is recommended, again, the word recommended, it shows up, that at least 3 of those additional permissible materials be added to the 70% brick. So you've already got a list of other materials that you have deemed to be worthy of the commercial aesthetic that you're looking for. So, maybe it's just as simple as saying that, drop the brick to 40% or 50%, or 70% of these permissible materials, including brick. There's a lot of different tweaks that you can make if you desire to.
It seems to me that that's where all the new businesses that's coming in is having the problem, is with the 70% brick on each wall. It seems like we hit that every time somebody starts in, it's not wanting to do the 70%. As far as us holding them up, they're not coming, they've got a copy of this, so they know exactly what our requirements are when they come to us.
Right. And that's the other thing, just in the broader context, is to remind you that it's the applicant's responsibility through their design team to make sure that they're designing a project that meets your standards, or to identify to us as staff that this is where we don't meet your standards. Sometimes where we can fall into a circular pattern is when they continually come with things that don't meet our standard because they either A, haven't read what your standard is, or B, don't care, neither of which are acceptable, in my opinion, or both. And so, that gets frustrating as staff. But at the end of the day, we as staff, we express to all applicants, we are not voting members of the Planning Commission. And therefore, if you strongly, as an applicant, if you strongly desire to send this project to the Planning Commission, the last thing staff wants to do is be a deterrent or inhibit someone from coming to you, because you're the decision-making body. So generally speaking, unless there's just some egregious, there's no way that's not going to work, for the most part, staff is going to bring you most everything that we see. We will issue those comments. We will say, this is where you're deficient in your application. Staff recommends or staff requires that you make these changes. If they choose to make the changes, great. We'll strike that comment from our review. If they don't, we'll keep that comment for our review and then let you determine if that's something significant that you don't want to budge on, or if that's something you're willing to give a little on, if they'll give somewhere else. And so that's where, particularly with design review, there is some give and take. Like Hardee's did, they bolstered up some of their landscaping areas, and they also did the accessory building and the dumpster area, correct? So I think it was a good compromise, and I suspect it'll result in a good project that everyone is proud of and comfortable with. But
Just for consideration purposes, looking at this over several times, when we say 70% of required materials are proven materials, and put brick down along with stone, rock, hardboard, just include it in the total list of it, and also add to all exterior walls, which doesn't have to be of that particular, it can be 70% of the dumpster area or whatever the case may be on it. That would cover a lot of ground right there. If we just drop brick down to the rest of the materials, and it says it has to be 70% of those materials, and you can choose, incorporate 3 of those into that material, and for all the walls that is going to be built on the property. So if you take the square footage of all the exterior walls that's going to be there, that's a lot of flexibility in what you can design, I think.
Well, they might choose to do 70% stucco though.
That's what I was
Instead
thinking.
of
And then
brick or
what's your other
stone.
30%? What's left?
That would be the risk in that.
Well, then maybe we should have a list what we don't want 70% of. Stucco, maybe one of those. It can be brick, stone, whatever. It can be 70%.
I
Yeah,
think if we lowered it to like 50% brick and then 50% other on our material list,
I think we
that
should-
would be a little bit,
I think we should leave it open to several different materials that they have to choose from. rather than
because,
just
but that would
brick.
be like 50% brick and 50% other of what we have on our approved list.
I think the thing with brick is it's a masonry product. It has a longer life and less upkeep. And I think that was the whole point of pushing 70% is then you don't have, which I'm trying to get in the head of a company like Hardee's. Maybe they have planned every 10 years they're going to revamp their building. So they want to have the cheapest, out of pocket on the front end so they could go back there and, hey, our colors are going to change. We're going to dump red burrito and bring in green burrito, and they want to, change their building design. So, but I think, cultured stone isn't really masonry, but it has a long life. So maybe looking at 70% of those materials with a longer life and backing it from there.
I agree with that.
No matter what we change it to, you're still gonna have some.
Yeah,
work done.
exactly.
Right, I mean, that's the whole
I think
deal.
we're beating a
no
dead
matter.
horse.
well, and that's almost why I think why even go there, because they're gonna come in and ask for variances anyway, at least have the standard to where we, where we feel comfortable, and then we can always give those variances.
I think there's room to clarify, but I agree with like changing it or adding all this language, seems futile.
Madam Chairman.
Well, even, what would 60%, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'll just remind you of the time.
Oh, okay. Even like 60% might be, a little bit down, and then you use the other percentage. Just,
I just don't think the percentage is what's driving all this. If you had 40%, they're still gonna come to you wanting 30%.
yeah,
It
I agree.
doesn't really matter. Your standards are your standards. If you lower the standards, they're still gonna push it and want to do less. I mean, it's, and I understand that they've got a prototype typical building, which they do everywhere, which could be stucco, you know, somewhere, and then they're wanting to adapt it here. But they need to come close to what we're asking for, you know.
Well, that's what it might be worth then looking at the Hardys, see what their stone percentage was. Maybe if it was 50%, then,
Yeah.
you know, we're close.
And,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
and one of the things that this, not necessarily these particular members, but the planning commission has done in the past is taken field trips. And if we want to try to have a work session or a training session where we take a field trip, allow me the opportunity to go and pull plans of 5 or 6 buildings that have been built in the past 5 or 6 years and say, okay, this is the percentage of brick on this building. Do you like how it looks? Well, yeah, okay, well, that was only 50% brick. By the way, this one over here that you like is only 50% brick. So, because it's so hard, even for those of us that are been around construction and plans and even renderings, you know, there's just no replacement for seeing it on the ground, walking around it, and hey, yeah, that's a pretty good looking building. So,
I just think there's other materials, like you said, that are long-lasting and low maintenance that can be used that look really nice other than brick, you know? I mean, why does it have to just, you know, our mindset is brick? It could be other, you know, it could be other materials that look really nice. Well, it looks like we've run up on to starting our planning commission meeting, so we'll just end this and continue at another time.